Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Brad. What's up, buddy?
Not much, man. It's been a good day. Daughter went to go see The Little Mermaid with her little 8-year-old friends. And so my son and I just hung out. We did a bunch of cool stuff. Went to Tractor Supply Company, went to Costco, hung out at the playground. I walked around the playground wearing a ruck vest, and everybody thought I was a lunatic. It's fun. It's good times. What about you?
That's good, man. So is that like the new thing for girls that age? Because I know like my girls grew up right in the middle of the Frozen.
I mean, apparently anything Disney related. Like last year was Encanto. Right now, apparently it's Little Mermaid. The year before that, it was Raya and the Last Dragon. It varies.
Crazy, man.
It varies.
So, no, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, things are good for me. It's we're getting back to the swing of things here, and it's just gonna be a crazy week. We get busy stuff. A lot of end of the year stuff for school. We're going over. So my kids do what's called Regents up here in New York. So it's all kind of state mandated testing with all their different classes, and this is the first year they do it, so they're freaking out over that, and we're studying, and we got all the 8th grade graduation stuff, so fun times. So anyways,
nice.
Tonight we've got a great guest on. He's a guy who is in the Iron Council with us, but he also got a great backstory, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time introducing him. His name is James Percival, and he runs, among other things, he runs Percy's Barbecue. So welcome to the show, sir.
Hey guys, glad to be here.
James, part of the reason we wanted to sit down with you is because you've got a really interesting story. You've got a lot of interest. You came from a very unique background. So without spoiling anything, much like Dan had alluded to, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, okay, let's just, I'll start where the journey begins with the IC, because that was the transition point for me. So, I'm 38, got a wife. She's tolerant of me, no kids. Wish I had kids, but that's okay. We'll get there later. So October 16th, 2021, that was the day that, I had that proverbial come to Jesus moment. Used to ride with a diamond wearing motorcycle club. Call it a gang club, whatever you'd like to. Man, I tell you what, it was an interesting transition, maybe a year or so before I joined the IC, because as I began to explore the Order of Man and the things like that, I began to realize that I really wasn't having the type of conversations that I desired. And mostly because that was weak in the world that I was in the tribe that I was in, and you couldn't talk about those things. So, I just kind of let it go. Just felt like I wasn't ready to level up just yet. And I was comfortable, to be honest with you. I wanted to stay where I was, and I was having fun as a adolescent, if you will. And so you fast forward through my better judgment, if you will. And I wound up in a situation where, my ego almost got me killed. Got jumped on by about 6 total, but 5 guys and 1 woman. Found myself underneath them, and one of them was trying to literally kill me. And I just, couldn't really help but ask myself how I got there and think about that. And it was kind of for a cliche response, it was kind of like a little bright light for me. And God was like, I told you so, I told you, and I kept telling you again. And so, shortly thereafter, we got through everything. Thank God somebody was there to help me and keep myself from getting killed. But after it was all said and done, my wife talked to me at home and said, look, man, we got to figure something out here. You're just not going down a good path. It's not good. You got to figure something out. And so that next day, I jumped into the Iron Council, and it has been, highly valuable since day one. From the business front, from the spiritual front, from every front possible. And, man, so that's kind of the big thing for me. There's so much history there, but that's going to take too long for a podcast episode. I can promise you, but that's why I'm here, man. This is where that's what got me to where I'm at today. So
that's powerful, man. Oftentimes you hear this adage that you have to hit rock bottom before you kind of look up and realize you got to start changing some things in your life. For you, rock bottom was at the bottom of a dog pile getting wailed on by a bunch of people. So, I mean, I guess, walk us through that a little bit. You're sitting there literally getting the living shit beaten out of you. What was going through your head at that moment? Like, obviously that was the catalyst to change, but what was going through your head in that moment while you're getting pummeled?
There were a few things, aside from how I got there, right? Like, how did you get here? That was the overwhelming statement. Just, the interesting thing, just to set that tone, was where I was coming from that night. I was out with the club at a quinceañera, celebrating one of the members' quinceañeras, or daughter's quinceañeras. And we had put some boxing gloves on. So, and I do well. I hold myself pretty well. I'm not the best, don't get me wrong, but you get pumped up when you do stuff like that. Your ego kind of gets out, so, yeah, I got this, whatever. And then, lo and behold, man, 50 yards from my house, that's where it happened. Now, as far as being in the situation, as far as I can remember jumping out of the car, first and foremost, I have a pistol under my seat. And so that's an element to consider. But I had him. The first one, I had no problem. And the second one, I had no problem. And this is, I don't know if I can describe this perfectly for you, but if you can just imagine, that action hero kind of moment where you're like, you're untouchable, right? And then something happens and completely takes the wind out of you. And that figuratively and literally happened, where the wind got taken out of me. There was a pretty large man that just basically tackled me to the ground, and then it just got worse from there, man. My watch was ripped off, and they were literally pulling my throat, man. And the thing was, I would like to sit here and tell you that there was like this itemized, itinerary that I was going over, but literally the loudest voices in my head was saying, how in the hell did you get yourself in this situation? And also that previous comment of, I felt like the good Lord himself was telling me, I told you, man, I tried to warn you. And this is what I wouldn't say it's what he made me do, but there is an intervention from a divine sense in that, I didn't get killed. And it only got worse because like one person did scream, kill that MFer. And it would have been easy for them to do because they had me dead to rights. So my whole life leading up to this point, I say my whole life, up until I hit my growth spurt, if you will, I was bullied way before then, man. I was such a small kid. I was very small up until 11th grade in high school. And I guess, some friends of mine, the first fight I ever got into, it was pretty brutal, man. And so I let that kind of dictate a reputation for me. And I never contested that reputation. I just let it follow me. And then you kind of think about, back to what your question was about, what, the thoughts that were going through my head. That's another thing I was thinking about. It was like, can you guys still hear me, by the way? Sorry, I just got a notice that, okay. Sorry, I got a lost connection notice. My bad. That was another thing that I was contemplating, was that I had allowed myself, my reputation to be dictated by other people, and I never contested it. Right. And that was such a sobering experience, especially in the moment of where I'm literally facing death, man. And I just had to straighten my shit up, for the lack of the better term. Sorry if I'm not supposed to cuss here. I apologize, but
no, go for it.
It was very loud and clear at that point where, because up until that day, when I started with the club, I was in situations where I was putting hands on people that didn't deserve it. I was just on a reckless path. I was, just because I felt like I had to live up to that reputation. And yeah, so that wound up being my brick wall. And that was one of those things that really I continued to think about even after the fact. Even the day I had to drop my colors for my club, that it was a bittersweet moment, but it was necessary. And I had no contention with that at all, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. I want to go back a little bit though, because you mentioned, when you're introducing yourself a little bit, how, you're in this group of bikers, and then, but you're looking at personal growth type stuff. You're thinking about, how do I make myself a better guy? How do I, you're looking at order of man type stuff. And what, being in that atmosphere, that culture, what kind of drew you to thinking that there might be something else out there for you, or walk us through kind of that, because I think that's a thing that a lot of guys go through, but I think your experience is even more kind of extreme given the experience and the lifestyle that you were living and then looking for that change.
I think that if you think about what a gang represents, it is a tribe, regardless of the activities within that tribe.
Uh-huh.
And I do believe that we as men desire a tribe, and for many purposes. Some of it's pretty selfish. Some, like, how can we serve in a way, in a group, in a community, that not only makes us feel good about ourselves, but it actually produces a value for other people, right? Now, that is the element that's missing in the club life, right? It's because it doesn't matter what you do, people are going to have their perspectives of what a club does, and they're going to call it gangs, and they're going to call it whatever. And realistically speaking, look, man, there's hood rat shit in there, and that's part of it, But kind of to what you're saying, I began to become, I guess, cognizant to the fact that there were things that I really needed to work out as a young man, or as a man. I'm 30 years old, 35 years old. For the lack of a better term, there's a lot of daddy issues there. There's a lot of nice guy syndrome there. And there's a lot of fronting, if I'm being real honest with you. I found an environment that I was good at because of the reputation that I was given from somebody else. And so that becomes, as I begin to really break that down, I start realizing that I haven't really earned or built anything for myself worth anything. It's just what people think I am, right? And that is a reverberating problem in that community of men. You have men that are wearing patches on their chest that say president, national president, sergeant at arms, enforcer, whatever, that are just titles. And they're proud of that, and they cling to that, and they would kill for that because that's all they have. And that's the label that they've either, I guess they've just rationalized, but that's what they are. That's who they are in this life. And excuse me, I'm sorry about that. And so I started to kind of realize that, and then realize that I was in the same boat there. I was wearing the patch, the colors, because it was somewhere I belonged, when in reality, in retrospect, even though I believe we all go through seasons in life and there are purposes for those seasons, I had no business in that environment. I was meant for more, way more. And the harder part with that is that I had some really very good and close best friends that, kind of got me involved with that. And they're great people. I would argue that 95% of the people in that world are just amazing people. They're just dealing with things they're not dealing with things that could really push them past that limit that's set by that club life. If that answers your question.
No, it does. And it's just, it's amazing to hear this story. I got to be honest with it. I met you in person up in Maine, and I didn't know anything about your background. And I remember seeing this big dude, and I shook your hand. We talked for a little bit, and I was like, man, this guy's like a gentle giant. And then I heard this story, and my first reaction was, he's bullshitting people. Like, this guy is not this, this tough guy who is in these situations. Like, he's just this nice, quiet guy from down south who has a barbecue, business. And I can't believe this story. So I guess what I'm saying is, whatever happened and all that transpired, it's really amazing to see the transformation that has occurred in you.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And I certainly honor that as well. I'm nowhere near where I need to be yet, but I can promise you I am on the right path now. I feel that. And you say gentle giant, such a funny thing. Let's be real, man. Like, even in the moments where I was putting hands on people, or I was in those, making those decisions that I shouldn't have made. I can't tell you how many times guilt set in. I'm just, that stuff happens when you're being someone that you're not, you know what I mean? And yeah, so I've always felt that, man. And I appreciate you saying what you're saying, because yeah, it's been amazing for me as well. And I would assume my family is, just being around it.
Yep.
Yeah, man. So something you've mentioned the word reputation a lot. Like a reputation in fronting. And you think of guys in general, we all, put on these facades like we're tough, or that we're better than we are, or that we're intellectual. And so much of that, unfortunately, is just utter bullshit. So I guess the question for you becomes, How was it when you stripped away that reputation and you started to see yourself for who you really were? Was that a very striking moment for you? Was that something hard to hard to come to terms with?
Yes, yes, and yes. All of that, all the above. I'll be honest, man. Like that was, and I'm sure that it served more purposes than just this one. But that reputation definitely kept me away from things I was afraid of. And I'll capitalize on that specific thing was, well, actually jujitsu was the thing that brought me to this realization. And I regrettably say I don't really actively do jujitsu, but, it's something I am planning on. But when I first started doing it, I came toe to toe with a guy who towered over me, and he was 19 years old. And that right there was just what it was. Nothing special about that. But then you look around this jiu-jitsu gym, and there's 13-year-olds that are throwing around adults. And it's like, this makes a lot of sense to me. And I started getting nervous, and I started realizing that, man, I am not as tough as I thought I was. I don't know the things that I thought I knew. And quite frankly, there are children in this place that could put me in my place. And that was a fearful thing for me, right? Because I feel like, well, not only just fearful, but at the risk of sounding kind of cliche about it, it was also a moment of clarity that these kids have done something. Okay, whether that's just jujitsu and they've been in it for, since they were 10, 11, 12, 13 years or whatever. That's not been something that is representative in my life. And so that right there was even a little disjarring, just thinking about like these kids have more commitment to things than I do. Even if that means mopping the floor with a grown ass man, that it's, you know what I'm saying? So I guess in retrospective, everything I can remember, and this really happened on that same night, just so y'all are on the same page, is a lot of things came to fruition. A lot of things did. And as soon as I jumped in the IC, that's where I really started feeling that it's almost like a pressure release, if you will, where these guys were like, okay, so let's not bullshit. Let's just be honest about who you are and where you're coming from. And that way, if there is something we can talk about or decipher, then at least we have the information. The most powerful thing that someone said in the Iron Council to me to this day was, "Me too, brother." Like, I get that. And that's, that kind of thing troubled me for years, because I felt like, as pompous as it may sound, or ignorant, I would even say, is that I felt like I was alone in a lot of these things. And then you got guys that are in the IC that have literally walked step for step the same journeys, and some are different, but they all, have the same connotation, if you will. So yeah, man, that's kind of where I landed. I was afraid of that. But again, just like anything else, if you rip a Band-Aid off, sure, there's some pain there, man, but it gets better. It heals. And that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at currently today, as I'm in that healing process.
So I was listening to that a little bit, and it made me think about how, you were talking about how you've got this reputation. You mentioned earlier, you've got this reputation that you didn't fight back against, right? You've got this tough guy persona, however you want to put it. And then you go to jiu-jitsu and you've got these 13-year-olds who can mop the floor with a grown man. I mean, it sounds like you had almost like an identity crisis at that point where you were kind of going, oh shit, like I'm not the tough guy anymore. I'm not, who am I? Is there a little bit of that going on?
110%, dude. Identity crisis. Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. Leading up to these points in time, I've got one guy that I talk to, outside of the IC. He's a good friend of mine, but he's one of those guys that does a lot of analyzing and a lot of thinking. So much so that it's a little bit, outer dimensional, if you will. So it's a little weird. And I get so turned off by the fact that we talk about trauma and we talk about identities. And it's just like, dude, I don't want to talk about this shit. But I'm telling you, as sure as I'm sitting here, the things that I really was uncomfortable talking about are the things that really started to unfold as things I had to address. And that identity crisis became a real thing for me. And so, yeah, that's good observation there.
So much like you were saying, like when you're starting to walk down that path, and the powerful words of "Me too, brother," stuck out. it's fascinating to think that, guys, we don't get the results that we want because we simply don't talk to each other. Yeah, like there's this idea of, oh, you can't talk about feelings because feelings are gay or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, it's incredibly validating and empowering when you realize there are other guys who are going through the same thing. Like there's a mutual friend that Dan and I have. His name's Ryan. We interviewed him recently, and he was going through some hardcore nice guy stuff in his life. And I was a little bit further down the nice guy path, and I remember just having a conversation with him, just talking about some nice guy stuff. And it was like his eyes got wide, and he's like, I never thought anybody else thought the way that I did. Holy crap. And just for him to have that light bulb moment go off where, this thing that he thought he was doing that made him crazy or less of a man was something that other men struggle with as well, and that there was a way through, is such a very powerful concept. And that, that's the foundation of something like the Iron Council, is to have these conversations that are difficult, that are real, that are raw, that are authentic. The guys, guys try to mask that by talking about sports or talking about, the weather or whatever. But in reality, men need to be talking to other men about this stuff. We so often don't.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And if I can plug in something, I want to give you a snapshot of the moment that I started understanding the things that were uncomfortable for me. And this has actually played a big role in repairing the relationship between my father and I. Jason Wilson's podcast with Ryan, The Comprehensive Male Man. And that's, I think a lot of the reason I had no problem adopting that reputation and that facade was that, my dad was and still is one of the toughest dudes I know, and gets it done, man. He just goes and goes and goes. And I think that there was a lot of more value in that lion imagery than I had in the lamb imagery. In Jason Wilson's perspective of being that comprehensive, know when to be the lion, when to be the lamb. And so I guess the greatest premonition that's really come from that for me is that there's an absolute need for that balance in our lives. And I think on top of all the other problems that we're discussing here right now, there's this wild tendency for wild pendulum swinging, far left, far right. And each time you do it, man, you overdo something, and it's like you got to go back and repair something. And I don't know if it's just how we've been conditioned as we grew up that, we just have to make this big life altering decision to get anything to work. But really, man, that's not the case. It's the baby steps. It's the process. And that stuff right there, that's where barbecue comes in for me. And that's where I really tune into that. That's what I love most about it, is that process aspect of it.
So that's actually a pretty good transition. Why don't we move off this, your history a little bit and talk a little bit about what you're doing now with barbecue, and tell us a little bit about how you got into that and what you're doing with it right now.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I don't have the cliche story of, I was raised around a smoker and things like that. I clearly just wasn't. What I somehow and somewhere along the line, I picked up the love of cooking. I just love to cook, man. I love food. I had a terrible relationship with food for a long time, but it's still, you got to get through those. It's part of it,
Too, brother.
But man, I just, growing up, we weren't really well off. We didn't have a lot of money or resources, but I tell you that one of the greatest memories, or set of memories I have, is, my dad had this old raggedy beat up smoker and grill. And when he fired it up, I just got excited. I was super, super into that stuff, man. The smell of that smoke and that rust and everything else that comes off of it. And so I just kind of picked that up, man. And I spent probably 15 years of my life in the hospitality industry, in, working for big hotel chains, like Marriott was my big one. And that kind of ties into the whole history for me too, but we'll save that for another conversation. But I just really, I loved doing that, and I loved serving people. And then people got in there and started toying with it and messed it all up for me. It just became disingenuous and really political and all kinds of things. And so, one thing that I can recall starting in the barbecue endeavor was we went to a restaurant not far from where I was lived out of. And you go in the parking lot, man, and there's everything from Lamborghinis to Honda Civics. The funny thing about barbecue, man, is like it knows no segregation. It knows no race. It knows no gender. It knows nothing of that. And I would argue that even just temporarily, that people that indulge, they're brought by the smoke. I mean, that's just what it is, right? And so for even just a moment in time, again, it might sound cliche, but this is just my mind thinking. It just makes everything okay for just a little bit of time. And I was really attracted to that. I was I was going to say not turned on. I'm not turned on by it. Don't get me wrong. I was really tuned into it is what I was trying to say. And so I just felt like, okay, maybe this is
sure.
Something I could do maybe long term, and enjoy it, and people say that if you enjoy what you do, as for work, you'll never really work a day in your life. And I haven't really experienced that aspect of it because it is hard work. It's rough work. I started out with the idea of creating a barbecue rub. I was quickly rerouted by a very strong present female in my life. I met her one time, and this was April of 21. And that same friend I was talking about earlier, that real weird one, he introduced me to her. She used to run a coffee shop that did Black Rifle coffee and some stuff. She's very local, community service kind of lady. And, he introduced me to her and basically said, hey, he's trying to start a barbecue business. She goes, well, good. I've got an event coming up in May and you'll be cooking there. And I said, well, hold on just a minute. I don't have a smoker. I don't have anything I could pull. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't ready for that. She goes, I didn't really ask you anything, man. So let's get after it. And I was like, okay, cool. So that really pushed me. In 3 weeks time, I was able to acquire a smoker and the things that I needed at bare minimum, and pulled up on May 1st and cooked my first event. And fellas, I'm going to tell you something. There's not a lot that I can experience that made me so afraid than to serve the public for the first time in my career endeavor. There was just so much that I will admittedly say I was overthinking it quite a bit, like we usually do, but I'll tell you, after it was said and done, it was the greatest feeling I've had to date about me being able to do something like that and be successful in doing it. And so that's just scratching the surface. I did some catering, and I've done some catering, and I still will do some catering. Catering is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it's not necessarily the work that I'm worried about. It's more so what I want to do with my business. And I do want to give good food and good service and things of that nature. But one of the biggest things that again, back to that story about Lamborghinis and Honda Civics is, man, I don't know a lot of guys that aren't really attracted to barbecue, at least the essence of it, And I've always experienced that fires bring people together, and you know what I mean, like somehow, some way, even after the destruction. And so, yeah, man, I really started putting my head to the ground there and thinking, what can I do to be more service minded in the community? How can I orient this business to, fulfill myself and other people around me? And I got to tell you, Colin Cottrell, man, he has played a big, big role in that, and he hasn't done a thing. It's just his presence. Back to y'all's experience, I'm certain, with the IC. That's the stuff we're talking about, man. It's just men that are intentionally present around you have this magic of just making you want to be better people. And that's what I feel, especially, in like-minded people like Colin. He invited me to do some camp cookout for him for his hunt camp. Again, something I started to overthink. And then he was like, dude, it's a bunch of dudes hunting hogs. It's not a 5-star restaurant. Chill out. Just bring yourself and bring your knowledge and let's go. And that's what happened. And it was good. It was so good. It actually, like I told you before we started, my business has started in 2021 officially. And the past 2 months, I have put more work into my business than I have since we started altogether. And so that's where we are today, man. I've got some other things, but I don't want to take up the whole time. You can ask your questions. Sorry.
No, I love that element of identifying what you can do with your business to serve those around you. And it's fascinating, man. Like you said you've put more work in the last 2 months than you had at any point leading up to that. And what's been the result? Like what's happened in the last 2 months? How's your business grown? What's developed? What's changed? What's been better?
Mostly the focus. That's been the most sharpened resource for my business that I have had. And don't get me wrong, even leading up to these past 2 months or so, I put some effort into my place in my business. I think I was struggling with was really the focus. Like, what's your objective, man? It's just like the vision we have, right? We can come up with all these, the battle plan or the things that we do like that. They don't matter if you don't have a goal, if you don't have an objective or a long-term vision, right? It's almost unending process. And so being around Colin, he was able to kind of help me get some clarity on what it is I'm trying to accomplish here and why, right? I don't think the why has ever been absent. The why's been there. It's just the what. Like, what are you trying to do? I got to tell you guys, I believe in the mission that we're on. I really believe in it. And it has been the element that has kept me glued together, even in the worst of times over the past year, almost 2 years now. And so that's something I feel as I partake, well, let me just say it this way. I take that from the Iron Council. And so now I have to give it back to the community because it's important to the mission and it's important to me. And so what I've decided to really focus on, long term here is, sure, I'd like to have a small building with a retail side and an area where we can do cooking classes and things like that. I do not and will never, if I have any option or any opportunity, I do not want a restaurant. I just don't want that. That's not what this is about. But right now we're working on setting up some men's retreat events, just like Colin does his events around hunting. I can absolutely do the same thing around barbecue because that draws people, right? And so the event that we're creating now is called Man Fire Faith. We're supposed to have this out and running before the end of the year. That's the plan. I'm one of those kind of people that takes blessings as signs because I have ignored them so long in my life. But one of the greatest blessings, just a week or two after I created this event or the plan of the event, somebody on my behalf, unbeknownst to me, got me a partner through a company called Lifeway Christian Stores. And out of the blue, they sent me a bunch of men's Bibles that are navigated heavily for men to contribute to doing this event for them. And so that's just one element of fellowship around what I'm trying to create. And so that just a small tidbit on that is I've been told as I was growing up that somehow, some way I was going to wind up in ministry and I wasn't having it. I'm not going to have it, right? Just not, no, there's no way, right? But somehow, some way, again, those signs that I look at, those blessings that we receive, I just feel like it's one of those things that the Lord's telling me again, I told you, and I've told you again. And that just becomes a redundant thing that I hear over and over again. And so, no, I don't think I'm going to lead some church or anything like that. But fellas, I look at barbecue as church. I look at barbecue as a spiritual process from start to finish. Harvesting an animal all the way to serving the person eating it. And so it just makes a lot more sense to me when I change the perspective like that.
That really is an amazing outlook on that. And I really like how you tie that into, you provide that kind of common ground of barbecue, and then you can provide the service and the situation where men can come together and work together to become better. It really is a great approach. And I think it's awesome because it is, something like what Colin does is awesome, but it is also limited because certain people don't do that, right? Everyone eats, and you're very hard pressed, like you said before, to find somebody who doesn't like good barbecue. So to get something like that where you can just get a bunch of dudes together and, all right, we're gonna do this, but we're gonna talk about life and kind of work things out here while we're at it and having a good time making this. It's great, man. I'm really excited to see where you go with that.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And just so you're on the same page too, man. I thought the same thing, and I still have, there is that niche that Colin offers with hunting, because a lot of people, they just don't want to be a part of that. And, look, some part of that is a little uncomfortable for me, but I also figure, man, if I'm going to partake in the aftermath of that, I have to honor it in some way. Yeah. I have to honor that. That's just my obligation. But what's also interesting, man, is I think where he is very successful in reaching those guys is that it's just another contaminated drop into the water supply. It's one other person that can go into their communities, and it works. And if that's one way to do it, I'm happy to support that. And that's what I'm hoping to gain from it too.
That's cool.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And something I'm drawn to as you're talking about this, you're talking about the idea of barbecue and eating being a spiritual experience. And you think of the very concept of eating, you're sitting shoulder to shoulder with other men. Much like it is with hunting, Colin takes men out and they're shoulder to shoulder in a blind, or they're shoulder to shoulder, in a Jeep. You think of the activities that men do where shoulder to shoulder working on something. And inherently when those things happen, conversation happens. And more often than not, those conversations become deep and meaningful and powerful. And that's such a cool opportunity that you have to be able to leverage that.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of you, man.
I appreciate that, man. Listen, one of the milestone moments for me was, the first hunt that we went on with him. I hadn't realized that Colin had Jack Donovan on one of his trips. And this is, I'm pretty sure Clint was there and some other guys were there too. But I happened to just catch a reel or a video of Jack Donovan speaking on something that hit me like a lightning bolt. And that was, he was going over, I think the guy's name was Lionel Tiger, the author's name. It was called Men in Groups. And he had said something, quoting from the book. He said, he essentially, this guy that authored the book coined the phrase male bonding. And he said to jump into male bonding and how, critical that is, there are steps to get there. And essentially you have to form trust with men. And in order to form trust with men, you have to aggress something together as a unit. Right. And it just made a lot of sense when I read that in the context I was reading it in, especially in real life application to things that we do, like our battle teams or groups of battle teams, or even having 5 or 6 or 10 guys that are on a hunting trip. We are there for a specific reason, to aggress a specific task as a unit, man. And I'm telling you, as sure as I was sitting there, because if I'm being honest with you, I wasn't sure how this was going to work, where his plan was to have guys talk and sit around and, obviously not go into deep stuff. At least that was my expectation, was like, guys are going to be there. We'll be hunting. Cool. No problem. But it was just laid out. It was almost like there was this pool, this organic pool, that these guys just felt like they were in a good spot to voice some of the things that they are really struggling with. And then there goes that terminology again. Me too, brother. And it just awesome. So this stuff reciprocates, and it's such a wonderful thing, man. I really appreciate it.
We talk about that, and we talk about kind of the power of the pack, and it always revolves around guys doing hard things together, right? Whether it's going out hunting or some kind of physical exercise, or, in your world, working a pit all night is not something that's easy, right? That's hard work to keep everything working and going and staying up and doing that whole thing. So it's, there's a common bond that's formed when guys do hard things together. And then the conversations that flow from that tend to be where the real value of that whole situation is. The hunting itself is great. The barbecue itself is great, right? The physical exercise, whatever. It's all good, but it's what comes, it's those little conversations that occur throughout the whole process that brings everyone back to it, I think. And to see different men approach this in different ways is just really awesome. And I'm glad that we're all 3 of us on this call tonight are part of that somehow, and that we're all kind of doing it in a different way, because it's allowing many different men to have different opportunities where they find both comfort in partaking in that action, whatever it is. And then also, being involved in and being able to have those conversations and have that experience.
Yes, sir. And if I'm being 100% honest with you, that is the very thing that I was struggling with in the club. You know, I don't know if you've ever experienced riding handlebar to handlebar at 100 miles an hour with other guys on a bike, and that's not super easy. But I'll tell you what, it's thrilling. It's very, very thrilling. I don't think there's anything I can replace that feeling with. But I will tell you also that that's about where it ends, right? It's cheap thrills. It's things that you can, it's great experience, and it's something I will never forget. But even beyond that, it's like, man, I was starving, whether it was to get good input or advice or just good conversations or, something. I was looking for something, and that was missing for me, man. And I'm so glad to have the perspectives that I have today. I'm super glad.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because as you were talking about that, I was thinking, we always talk about the power of the pack being this positive thing, right? And you surround yourself with a bunch of guys who are like-minded and are out to achieve the same goals, and you're bound to succeed. But you were actually in a situation early on where you were in a pack, and that pack definitely had power, but it didn't give you exactly, great outcomes, I guess is the word I would use. And the results of it were actually negative, but it was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the power of the pack that kind of pushed you all in that direction as well.
Absolutely, man. And quite frankly, there was a transition period there. So what you're referring to there is called the mentality of the mob, or a mob mentality, right?
Yep.
And that, and again, this is recent retrospection, probably 6 months to a year, where I realized that there was a lot more of emotional things going on in that mob, and that's what makes a mob dangerous. You make emotionally charged decisions. There's always somebody trying to beat their chest and show how badass they are and things like this. And it's really strange to me, thinking what you were saying a second ago, or a little bit ago anyway, is that in that community, in that arena, I had no problem stepping up to the man. I had no problem putting going chest to chest with somebody, because I guess it just empowered that negativity in me. But then I guess you kind of know the people that just talk a lot and say words a lot, and they don't have any action behind it. And I was one of those dudes, the wrong kind of action, if you will. But yeah, man, I can see that, and I have seen it, because the one thing that our club always used to say, or at least say, not act upon, was the patch does not make the man makes the patch, right? And unfortunately, that was even limited, because in that community, you're talking about clubs that have been around for centuries, man, like long time. And they have this tradition of, just it's so many traditions that are so abnormal. Like, there are clubs that don't have people of different color in them, and they don't have any other bikes that are not made in America, and just these weird things, right? These weird little protocols. And so you can only go so far, with limited, boundaries, if you will, man. But yeah, I experienced that same thing. And yeah, again, good catch on that, because that's important to note for maybe somebody who is listening about, and might be experiencing that type of mob mentality, or in that environment, in that arena. And all I could really say to that is there is much more outside of that than what you can see right now.
Brings me back to the concept of purpose, right? Yeah, you could be in a group like that where there is, a pack where you've got a group of men. What's their purpose? What's their desired outcome? And what's drawn me to men like you guys is the idea that you have a purpose. You're aspiring for something more. You're aspiring to be the best man you can be, the best husband you can be, the best father you can be. That may look slightly different for all of us, but because we want those things, we are challenging each other, that helps raise the level of the collective. So to me, I think that the key differentiator there is purpose. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what's really cool to think about, also kind of a double-edged sword, is that, man, to be looking for a group of men like that, like whether it's the IC or a motorcycle club, that shows that whomever is seeking that has that sense of purpose, right? Has that sense of they have to find something, right? So that gives me a little hope that it's still within each one of us. It's then just the choices that are made within that. Because just like I made the choice to get out of it, somebody could also make the choice to get out of something like the Iron Council because the work's not being done, right? It's just broad. It's this thing where, okay, I'm here. Now what? Well, without intent, without purpose being served, you'll grow stagnant. Just like, I mean, that just goes into a whole different slew of things in my opinion, but it's there, and I can appreciate that's there. And so that's been, kind of back to the barbecue thing where I'm looking at these events and the things that I want to accomplish with this business is to catch those dudes that are right there in that drift, right there in that moment of maybe they are involved in things that they should be, or maybe they're not. Either way, I still think we have those struggles that even in the midst of great things, we have those doubts. We have those things that pull us behind or make us consider other options or whatever that case is, right? Whatever that means. So the more positive people that have purpose or intent that we have around us, that's really where that power of the pack thing comes into play.
That's very well said, man. So we've been going here for about 50 minutes, so I want to be kind of cognizant of everyone's time, and I think there's a lot more where we could go here, so we might have to have you back on. But why don't you let the guys know where they can find you online?
Yeah, man, absolutely. I appreciate the time for sure. So primarily I am online presence, percysbarbecue.com. So that's PercysBarbecue.com. That's how you spell barbecue. We can fight about it if you want to. It doesn't matter. Yeah, so that's where I basically sell, the rubs. One thing I want to plug on the rub side of things is the bottles of rub that I sell, I contribute a percentage of those profits to a group called 3FTL. That's 3 Frank Tom Limo. How about that? I know it's probably way off, but it's if you guys check them out, they have their own website. It's 3FTL.com. What they do is they support first responders and veterans that are suffering from PTSD, and they do that by supervising different hobbies, different events for these guys. They're all crowdfunded. So any medical personnel they have is all doing it for volunteer services. So it's just one little thing I can do to help with that. So if you do want to support me, you'll also be supporting them in that regard. And I appreciate that in advance if that's the case. One other thing is I actually am in the process of moving from Texas to Montana. And so we're bringing the Texas niche to Montana because they desperately need something up there. I've experienced it myself, but along the same lines is it's a good place that I can do the food service aspect of it, but that's where I have to dig in my heels and find that purpose, right? Fulfill that purpose of what I'm trying to do. So hope it's a great opportunity for my family and I. So.
That's great, man. We definitely need good barbecue up here in New York too, but I wouldn't recommend you move up here. So I think Montana is a better choice.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, dude, this is a great conversation. When you get Manfire Faith going a little bit more, let's have you back on to talk about that and talk about what you're going to be doing there. I'd love to have that discussion. So
absolutely.
In the meantime, we want to thank all the guys who have listened. Make sure you're checking us out at untamingmasculinity.com. You'll find show notes for this and all of our other episodes. We'll have links to all of James's stuff, his social media and his website and all that stuff. The website's really easy to navigate. I actually just picked up a 3-pack of rubs while we were talking on this call tonight. So make sure you guys go over there and grab some.
Nice.
And, if you found value on this show, make sure that you give us a rating and review. That really helps us get the word out to guys. And the more ratings and reviews that we get, it helps spread, the algorithms, however they work. They like that stuff. And just finally, make sure you're coming back next week. We got great guests lined up. We got a couple of exciting ones in the hopper, and we're looking forward to making this year one of our best yet. Until next week, we will leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?